going to the group who's the darling of the moment, and the one guy just won the world title, and say, hey, now's your chance to have some leverage because they're probably going to fuck you.
Yeah.
And, that was going on in a lot of cases at that period of time in that company. So somehow they got the idea between the night that he won it and the next day that they wanted all you guys gone because of what you might potentially do to them in retribution for what Chris had done.
Right. And that was the farthest thing. I mean, I remember telling David Penzer the night before that I was going to make Chris the champion. He said, I've heard of extending olive branches, but I never heard of giving the whole olive tree. I said, well, the guy deserves it. And he's worked hard. And this is business. This isn't personal. And I know that we all in the business, Jimmy, have worked with guys we didn't like. We've worked with guys that things were, really sideways. But if I'm running a company and this guy deserves to be the champion, I got to do the right thing for business. Or I had separated from my wife. I didn't want to separate from my paycheck.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to, bite my nose off to spite my face.
Well, it's another thing also is people would have been, you little devil, you weren't that stupid. People would have been looking for any sign of, oh, now he's sticking it to Benoit, which is why that you were trying to go in the other direction to prove that you were not going to, and certainly not just, out in the open. It didn't make any sense to me at the time of why that if there was an issue, why suddenly he would have won the world title and then left. Because then that put a bunch of heat on you, which is probably what the people that were in his ear or that group's ear wanted to happen to begin with. Because now you put the belt on somebody, and now they've just given an ultimatum. They're gone if you're not gone. So right. that didn't help you any.
Guys, and it wasn't just one guy I was going to lose. Benoit, Malenko, Guerrero, Perry, and Shane Douglas, and I think Conan was originally in the bunch.
That's right.
And he backed out.
And then Vince didn't want Shane back anyway, right?
Yeah.
So he kind of had to, well, never mind.
So Shane's story about that was he told me, Shane and I are friends, he told me that they were all supposed to go to a meeting, and Russo and Shane were friends, and Russo called Shane and said they're up in New York meeting with Vince now. He said, no, they're not. They're my friends. They wouldn't do this to me. He said, no, they're there. So he called Malenko on his cell phone. Malenko answered and asked him point blank, are you in New York? He said, absolutely not. He hung up. He called Russo. Russo told him, yeah, they are in New York. He said, you're full of crap. And he hung up on Russo. Then he started thinking, and he knew where Vince put the boys up at the hotel. And he called the hotel and said, you have a Dean Malenko registered? And the guy said, no. And Shane said, wait a minute, do you have a Shelley Simon registered? And he said, yes. And he called Shane. Shane called him. So, right off the bat, things weren't rolling too well.
Well, I
don't think.
I was just going to say, I remember Vince McMahon rolling his eyes at the mention of Shane Douglas's name. So I kind of knew that I didn't know why Shane had made the grandstand down there, because I kind of knew that wasn't going to work out on the other end.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you that. I thought, from what I gather from Shane and what I gather from other people, that his run there with Vince was not a cool ending. You know what I mean?
I don't know whether Shane hated it more or the office hated it more. That was one of those mutual, we don't like anything about this relationships.
Right.
Shane hated the gimmick, hated the way he was used, and hated all the guy. Because that's when the first time, the Dean Douglas thing, that's when Hall and Nash were running roughshod over everybody up there. He hated that whole thing. And he didn't really impress anybody on the other side as far as I'm not talking about his work. It didn't fit. It didn't fit. Right. But anyway, it was so. Did you speak to Chris Benoit face to face or even on the phone after he went in? He was part of the group to go in and give the ultimatum. Did you ever talk to him again? What did he say about it after I won the belt and now I want you gone, Booker?
I never wanted to give him the satisfaction. I mean, I knew there was not going to be any on both ends. There would have been, nothing was going to change.
Right.
And I didn't think, here's the thing. He worked his ass off to get there to be champion. And my thinking was, I was the first guy to give him the belt. If he didn't trust me that night, he was never going to trust me again.
Yeah.
And especially when he said, I need to be gone, Mike gone, JJ needs to be gone. So I'm saying, well, if that's how he felt the night I gave him the belt, it's never going to get better.
So obviously, they did not acquiesce to the group's demands. And so they gave him their release and they went and debuted as a group in the WWE. Brian, what time of year was that in the year 2000? Was that summertime?
I'd have to go back and check. I don't have that in front.
One thing I found you don't know off the top of your head, but at Kevin, at that point, what kind of did you have contact with Nancy or Chris anymore after that from 2000 until their whole run in the WWE?
No, never had any contact. The only time I had contacts when we signed the papers, I was in the Keys, she was in Daytona, and we never had contact after that.
I know that, in the show also, Vicky Guerrero had said, especially after Eddie passed away, that Nancy comforted her, over the situation. And then, what was your relationship like with Vicky Guerrero?
Never met the lady.
You've never met Vicky either?
No.
Well, I get it. Actually, back in those days, it was not common at all. Now everybody on the rosters are married to each other in relationships. But back then it wasn't common to bring the wives if the wives were not on the card, and there weren't that many wives on the card. So I guess that's true. But so I was going to ask, where I was going with that was, would Vicky Guerrero have him, because she started to know that there was problems and with Chris and with the relationship, would she have ever confided in you or whatever? Did anybody tell you that Chris and Nancy then were having problems when they started having issues?
Well, I mean, I think we've all heard, and Sandra alluded to it on an interview, that a lot of people think, and it's been said, that Chris had an affair while he was married to Nancy. And I don't know, what Sandra knew then and what anybody knew, because I was so far removed from the situation, Jimmy. About this time is when I wasn't working much in the business. I had built the gym, from scratch. And It was
down there in Key West, right? You spent years down there.
Yeah, in Islamorada, I built the gym from the ground up, bought a piece of property, knocked the building down, and then built an 8,000 square foot building. So I didn't hear from them, but a few people, somebody else said, a couple of people that said that to me. One of them that, I don't think he'd make up a story, but for me to have any contact with him, no, I never did. And I do know that from that same guy that told me what we were talking about was, a lot of people were mad at Nancy because Chris leaving his family and baby. So the thing about Vicky saying that she knew everything about the relationship, well, she was hearing from one side, and I do understand her hearing that from one side, how you can believe the person and not say, well, something else is. I'm not here to point fingers at anybody.
Well, no, in any relationship, there's always there's two entities in it, and those entities always have ancillary people that are closer to them. And if anytime somebody leaves somebody and goes with somebody else, somebody got left and somebody got gone to, and there's going to be sides taken in that. And right. But I was just wondering if anybody had had told you even that, because we've heard stories now that Chris was acting strange the last year of his life, especially after Eddie Guerrero died, but also just not even the grief that he was feeling over that, but being paranoid or taking different ways home from the gym or etc. Did you know that there was any, they mentioned it because William Regal lives in the area and he had heard rumbles, but Johnny Grunge, who had been a friend of theirs, he was already dead. Did you know that Chris was in any way behaving strangely or unlike his normal self?
Well, I don't know about the changing from his normal self, but Dave Penzer said that, he was very introverted the last year. So, you got to realize that him and Eddie had a very unique relationship. If you remember when they had the bell ring for Eddie, Chris was out there and crying.
Yeah.
Emotional. And that's how close these guys were. They, and Malenko, the three of them were the three amigos, as you know, Jimmy. They traveled the world together. They were inseparable. They got up, had breakfast, they went to the gym, they tanned, they got a shower, they packed their bags, they went to the matches, they came back, went to the bar, had beer, and the thing started all over again. They went, they're huge. They went over there to Japan, all three of them, as, just filler, and they became big performers over there.
Yeah.
So, and the night Eddie both won the world titles. That was an emotional moment for those guys. And it was like, see, we told you we could do it. And, as I said before, having the three of them plus Raven, plus Ray, plus Jericho. And, I met Jericho with you, Jimmy, up in Smoky Mountain. How much better talent you could have, young talent at the time. How much better young talent could you have? So, I can understand the emotional collapse that he might have had because of Eddie.
And it also, at the same time, the media tried to go into the whole steroid thing and roid rage, and it's that the Nancy Grace level people on television just wanted the hot headlines. But as well as I do, there's roid rage, and that doesn't even begin to take into account what happened. And I've always thought, and I was talking to Bobby Fulton about this the other day. He said to tell you how